January so far, which is actually pretty normal for the trends.
And thinking about that, is there anything specifically driving these reefer volumes? Are we all buying frozen pizzas while we're stuck in the cold at home? Or is this general kind of, we're seeing the bounce back a little bit from that lull from New Year's?
So there's a lot of goods that are very popular during the wintertime, and some of them can be considered reefer freight. Soup. Now, is soup refrigerated? Well, not exactly. But considering the weather that's been going on, it is protect from freeze. You cannot have a soup can freeze. It may burst. And then if it bursts on top of a pallet and all the other stuff and the pallet gets covered in soup, they're going to reject that pallet and maybe reject the entire load. But if you compare this on our next chart here, and we'll burn through this one real quick here. This is the first few days. This is us right here, Thomas. And you can kind of see here, every January, there's a little bit of a bump there. A little bit of a bump, a little bit of a bump, and you normally kind of finish the January out with volumes just right below where we started. So there's always a little bit lower volumes at the end with a little bit of a bump in the middle. So the trend is still kind of dead on. Just volumes are a little bit lower than the previous 2 years because of what we had during COVID.
Exactly. I really like it. It's fascinating. It almost looks like a return to a form of seasonality. You know, we're finally going back to 2020 levels right now prior to the pandemic. But the big question will remain, look at this data set. We've got humps, we have movement, but are we going to see any kind of meaningful movement, or will we be similar to like maybe 2018?
Yeah, well, this is back to 2020. We're probably going to be more similar to 2019. But see, this is COVID. This is the beginning of COVID in 2020 right here. This is the higher peaks of COVID, the green line being COVID through 2021, and the blue line being 2022, where we got into that where volume started to drop off. So these are actually 3 totally different years. And I say totally different because this is where it took off. This is the steady, the green is the steady high point of COVID, and then the blue line's where we see the boom end. So beginning of the boom, the end of the boom, and then where we are today. Now, let's get into the next chart here real quick. And this is what I want to show you. Looking at our weather right through here is our freeze line. These are the lows. Not the highs, these are the lows, which are also important because a lot of drivers shut down at night. And while we could see a big boom during January is, all these are freezing temperatures. Now, depending on how long you're stopping your truck in these freezing temperatures or running in these freezing temperatures, could depend on that protect from freeze. Protect from freeze doesn't mean you need a reefer. It's always safe though. So a lot of guys will put the time down. They'll get there. Some of these loads might be rejected, some not, and you might pay a whole lot of money. You know, risk it for the biscuit, they say. Well, if you look at this blue line here today, anything up in here may be protect from freeze. And think about it, a lot of those might be liquids, whether it be colas, you know, water, even water right now, because you don't want the water to freeze and break the bottles. Some food items, some industrial items like paint. So keep an eye, keep a watch on our weather here, watch the lows. And if your load is protect from freeze and going to hit these freezing weathers, you better watch how long and what degrees they're getting down to.
Well, hopefully it's not going to be partly cloudy with a chance of spoiled soup. That's going to be it for our first carrier update, of course. We're going to toss it over to Kaylee Nix for our first look at top stories.
Thanks for that, and I'll have more on the weather coming up in just a few minutes. But first, let's look at your top stories on FreightWaves.com this morning. Triumph Financial Group, which includes payments platform TriumphPay, reported its fourth quarter results last week, where they hit a better than forecast performance in some measures, but its open loop network system also hit another milestone. Triumph's earnings per share was 67 cents, beating estimates by 3 cents, with a fourth quarter revenue of $112.84 million. The company stock moved up following the news after being down about 47% overall last year. Triumph says that it has officially seen $1 billion in volume of conforming transactions on its platform, a feat that happened in just 1 year. The Surface Transportation Board has responded to several shipper concerns about rail service, including a complaint brought to the board by 8 members of Congress. STB Chairman Marty Oberman acknowledged the frustrations over delays on the Union Pacific network, but did not commit to hosting a hearing on the issue. UP had issued an initial embargo due to weather on operations in Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin back on December 29th. That embargo was estimated to last 14 days, but had been in place for over a month. UP said that it had lifted the embargo as of last week, but they also noted that there is another winter storm headed for the Midwest this week as well. And tanker investors are watching the market closely to see what happens as sanction effects on Russian crude oil start to materialize. There's been a decrease in spot rates for tankers, which has scared off some investors, leading them to question where the bottom of the fall is. But experts say that the current rate environment remains far above long-term averages, and the quote-unquote collapse was just a fall from unsustainably high prices. Voyage distance for tankers is increasing thanks to those sanctions on Russian-born crude, as those shipments move to India instead of to the European Union. On the flip side, the EU is having to buy oil from further away, adding once again to that increased voyage distance. You can find those headlines and more by logging on to FreightWaves.com. If you're watching us on YouTube, like and subscribe to stay updated. Head on over to tv.freightwaves.com or log into our FreightWaves app for anything that you might have missed here from FreightWaves TV. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with a look at weather, and John Gallagher is joining us. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
And welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our first check of the weather. You heard Donnie talking about the freezing temperatures and what to expect with the really cold weather as far as when you're running this week. Well, we're also going to talk about it not only from a protecting your equipment standards, but also from a very hazardous travel condition standpoint, where we're going to be seeing travel impacts all the way from central and southwestern Texas, up through the Central Plains, down into the Deep South, up into the Midwest, into the Mid-South. Basically everywhere these next 3 days is going to have some really big time travel impacts with some winter weather on the way. Let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. What we're going to watch for is kind of this materialization, kind of this perfect storm setup where we've got Arctic air in place already, and then we've got some pretty big intense moisture feeding in from the Gulf Coast, which is going to interact with that existing Arctic air. So our first place where we're going to be watching this is going to be across central Oklahoma into central and southwestern Texas. This first piece of the winter storm is developing today. What we're going to be watching is, it looks like snow on radar right now because this is looking higher up into the atmosphere. But closer to the ground temperatures are still warm enough where surface temperatures are below freezing, but the precipitation is falling as rain. So we're watching a pretty significant freezing rain event set up across central Texas into southern Oklahoma. That's going to be mainly the icing concern for today. Alongside of that, we'll have concerns for some sleet and accumulation, but the freezing rain turning into ice is going to be the main big deal here. We're going to be looking at hazardous travel. That means across the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, I-20 from western Texas Texas in through the DFW area, then I-20 moving east into East Texas, and then also up I-35 into Oklahoma as well. Surfaces, bridges, roads going to ice over pretty quickly, and then eventually we will see some additional ice accumulation in some spots where we could get upwards of 1 inch to 1.5 inches of total ice accumulation. So threats for that include power outages, down trees, down power lines, you name it. We could potentially see it here these next few days. That's also going to interact with more moisture that will be in place across the southeast, leading again to that icing threat and the winter weather threat all the way across central Arkansas into western Tennessee, eventually into the Tennessee Valley and up into Kentucky. We'll continue talking about later on in the show, but just something to note is that everyone needs to start being prepared. Winter weather going to start today, this morning, across Texas and Oklahoma, and then eventually move up to the northeast. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in the show. Right now, we'll toss things over to Isaiah Buchanan for our first check of what's trending on social media.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and football's biggest stage has been set. Yesterday was Championship Sunday, and the Philadelphia Eagles won the NFC Championship game 31-7, while Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs won the AFC Championship game 23-20 in a nail-biter. But Philadelphia fans are super excited, and their love is spreading even further into New York City, where the Empire State Building posted this tweet saying, "Fly, Eagles, fly. We're going green and white in honor of the Eagles' NFC Championship victory." And I just find this to be a little strange, considering the Eagles just put out the team where the Empire State Building resides in New York Giants. It doesn't really make sense why they would want them to win. Maybe the Empire State Building forgot where they're located. So who knows? Who knows? But speaking of the Philadelphia fans, keeping with them, they got a little rowdy after the game yesterday. Take a look at this video that was posted on Twitter. These streetlights, they got up on the pole and took them off. And you can see everybody around them on the ground is cheering them on. I mean, they were just having themselves a ball out there in downtown Philadelphia after the game. And I mean, rightfully so. They haven't been to the Super Bowl, and I want to say since 2017, with Nick Foles coming in and winning them that Super Bowl. So, but they also had a really cool drone show in the sky for their fans. Take a look at this video. Super Bowl 57 will take place on February the 12th. The kickoff will be at 6:30 Eastern Time, 3:30 Pacific Time, and it'll be out in Arizona. And I'm really looking forward to this game. It's the two number one seeds in the NFL, two best teams. Couldn't ask for a better matchup. Kaylee, Anthony, who are you guys going with for the Super Bowl?
You know, gotta say I'm a Chiefs gal for this one, just because Cowboys play in the NFC East, so I really can't root for the Eagles. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't really have a dog in this fight, but
I also love to see Jalen Hurts making it to the Super Bowl and like actually finding success in the NFL. So
yeah, I just want to see a good game or a very one-sided, exciting game.
There you go.
1-2.
All right, Isaiah, thank you for that. We'll talk to you coming up a little bit later. Right now, we're going to welcome in our Washington correspondent, John Gallagher, to talk a little bit about some new numbers being dropped from the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. John, thanks for being here. And let's just dig right into it. We've got a pretty steep increase in the number of positive tests going on. What's happening?
Yeah, there is, and the reason I looked into this is because we hit sort of an anniversary mark, or a 3-year mark in the clearinghouse of stored violation data. Which started in January 6th of 2020, and so employers are no longer required to request drug and alcohol data from the previous employer directly. Now they can. All that information is now stored in the clearinghouse for the last 3 years, which had been the requirement before. So now they just need to go into the clearinghouse to get that data. So some of the stats on that now. So the total drug violations, as you mentioned, there's pretty big steep increases, like 18%. increase in total positive drug tests, which basically is a doubling of the rate from the year before, where there was like a 9% increase. And if you look at just the three major substances that are usually in violation in the clearinghouse, marijuana being the top one, that's up 31.6% over the last year, and between from 2021 to 2022, that is, and from 2020 to 2021, that was 5%. So that was a huge increase. Cocaine is up 25% versus 10% for the previous comparison, and methamphetamine is up 9.6%. And even I didn't put this in the story, but even if you look at alcohol violations, those are up 7%. Although that is a drop in terms of the rate from the previous year, which was 24%. And in fact, if you look at, there's 14 substances that are tracked in the database, and only 2 showed a decrease over the last year in terms of positive violations: heroin and hydrocodone, which is like a prescription pain reliever. So I mean, the caveat to that is that there are more violations reported each year because there's just more drivers and carriers that are registering. So that would naturally mean you'd have more positive tests. But that number of added registrants over the last 3 years has kept going down as the database fills up. So that trend, that rate increase, sort of goes pretty much against that trend. The good news is, I mean, I guess the one point of good news there is that more drivers are getting rehabilitated and re-entering the truck force that did have positive, that had to go through the return to duty. So you had, if you look at the percent of drivers who had tested positive and then cleared to drive again over the last 3 years, it went in 2020, it was 12.5% cleared and went in, and then in 2021, 22% cleared the process. And then in 2022, you had 27.6%. If you look at just the past year, so that number has steadily increased, which is a good thing. But you still have there's still 120,000 drivers that are still going through the return to duty process now.
And John, with that 3-year memory built in for positive tests, after that 3-year ends, does it just fall off that list and now they can kind of continue to work through that process and re-enter the force?
Yes, yeah. So now they don't have to go back to the employer. All that information is now in the database now. So that means that the clearinghouse is now the place to go for this violation information. Yeah.
That makes sense. And it's really interesting to see that sharp of an uptick, especially on the marijuana side. And why do we think that this is kind of this big uptick going on right now? Obviously, we know that more states are moving towards legalization efforts, either recreationally or medicinally. And do you think that could have something to do with it?
Yeah, I mean, that's been talked about as one of the reasons for that. And, the database doesn't give all the specific reasons, but that could be one. But interestingly, from a safety standpoint, our colleague Rachel Premack last summer, she did a story on a study that showed that that basically marijuana use, I think this was for recreational drugs. It said this study suggested that recreational marijuana reduced the risk of large truck crashes, and the reasons that pointed they didn't know exactly what the study wasn't conclusive, but they thought the 2 reasons given there was that those who normally drink alcohol may have switched to marijuana. So and also the other reason was that marijuana is usually consumed at home and not at a bar or a restaurant where a trucker might be. But I mean, it's unclear. I mean, most people would say that roads are safer if you don't have drug abusers on the road. I mean, and there's also capacity implications here, because I did a story in 2019, just before the clearinghouse opened, on the amount of trucking capacity that could be taken off the roads, by the rule due to drivers getting caught. And it was predicted then that it was like if I'm remembering, it was like 3 to 10, as much as 10%. Which would be bad, if the demand is out there for trucks, but you can't see drivers to take advantage of it. That's obviously a bad thing. But I looked at the numbers, and it's closer to around 4% on the number of drivers that are now on what's called prohibited status. As I mentioned, about 120,000. But anyway, so I thought that the capacity implications are interesting too, and that's something to be kind of looking at this clearinghouse to see what effect that has on trucking.
So for a driver who has been caught with something, he's been caught in a violation, they've gone through their rehabilitation process, and now they're looking to re-enter as a driver or get rehired back on with a different company, are they required then to submit their proof to the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse and then try and find a job through them? Or how does that process work for drivers looking to re-enter the workforce?
Right, that whole return to duty process is now being tracked in the clearinghouse, because in addition to the drivers and the drivers and the carriers, you also have substance abuse professionals that are required to be in the clearinghouse. You have the medical review officers that look at these. Look at the testing process and the return to duty and the after test to make sure you go through the process, and third-party administrators too. So all that information is required to be in all that return to duty process information is required to be in there. So yeah, they have to go through the clearinghouse. Basically, is where all that is tracked, and they don't have to go to the clearinghouse to get a job necessarily, but as they go to a new employer to seek employment after going through that process, that all that information is going to be in there for that employer to see, and to see where they stand, and all in real time, versus the way it was before the clearinghouse, where there could be all these delays, paperwork catching up, which is why you would have this big loophole of drivers that are potentially abusing drugs out on the road.
And John, in your opinion, would you say that we would be years and years and years out, or if there were any type of leniency on recreational marijuana use for drivers?
Yeah, I would say so. From the federal perspective, as Kaylee said, you have these states having their own laws, but in terms of the federal government, that would be a pretty heavy lift to have the federal government, say we're not going to preempt this anymore. It's just that's just the way it is, and I think most people would agree with that.
All right, John, thank you for joining us to talk about this. Anything else that you're working on for us this week?
This week, I'm looking at, actually, I'm trying to get some more information from not more information, but kind of look at the Federal Maritime Commission's take on that breakup of the MSC Maersk alliance that Greg Miller had reported on. Also doing a story on ELD safety as well.
Also, we'll be looking forward to those updates, and we'll be sure to check in with you once those come out. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, you guys.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now in just a few minutes.
event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Watson, enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live. Good morning and welcome to our second carrier update. I'm Thomas Watson. Joining me, of course, is Donnie Gilbert. And Donnie talked a little bit earlier about reefer volumes. Now we're looking at rejection rates.
Yeah, so here in the blue line, I've got rejection rates that I've backed it out all the way from 2018 all the way through to today. And today we're at 5.79%. If you look at this little red line here, this is where the 5.79% is. And we've only had one time during 2020 that we've really been below kind of this time period that we've been in for the last 3 or 4 months. Normally, you know, even a lot through 2019, I think it got down to like 9.19%. That was the lowest for reefer. And then right before the shutdown, before COVID, it got down to just below 3%, I believe, 2.83 or something like that. But, you know, during COVID, it got up to just over 50% of all the reefer loads were being rejected at one point or another. And now down to 5.9%. Of course, this has to do with, number one, too many trucks on the road. We got too much capacity. And of course, we got very high fuel rates. And of course, reefers also run off diesel fuel as well. So they're buying reefer for their trailer and they're buying reefer for their truck. And the average rate of diesel is, you know, still well over, you know, still almost $5 a gallon.
That's what's fascinating because in spite of really high fuel prices, which reefer units can also use a diesel depending on the generators, you know, this is very interesting to look at. 5.79, we're consistently hovering over that. You know, it's really hard sometimes to tell how much capacity is. This is such a great chart to see because, you know, beginning in July with the pandemic, everyone needed to jump in, entered the market. When do you think this is going to go up? Are we going to have anyone leave the reefer market? Are we going to switch it back multimodal? What are your thoughts?
Well, we got two things pushing rejection rates down now, not just pricing. That high price of diesel, it's better for carriers to jump on a contracted load plus their fuel surcharge than it is to run their regular average spot rate right now for most lanes. So that's one reason everybody's just jumping back and taking contracted freight. And the other is there's too much capacity, so they're not wanting to go to that, and that's going to take it away from the spot markets because everybody's jumping back again on pushing them back to those contracted loads. So as long as they're being pushed back to their contracted loads, it's going to stay this way. It's going to take a very strong event to break away from this right now. It will eventually happen, but right now, as long as everybody's accepting contracted freight, that can hold up from it ever making it to the spot market. So rates have to go up quite a bit right now to break away from these contracted loads. Number one, if you look at our NTI versus our contracted rates for reefer, there's a 45, 50 cent difference. And you still get fuel surcharge with reefer where those spot rates are all in. So we could see a 50 cent per mile increase on spot rates. And yeah, this will come up some, but it may not break a lot of people away from their contracted freight because it's still even.
It'll take some time to thaw out. Had to put in the reefer ice joke. You got to thaw your reefer trailers too sometimes, so we're getting there. But thanks so much, Donnie. We'll take a look at our third carrier update on the next hour of the show, of course. But until then, let's toss it back over to Kaylee and Anthony with our next guest.
All right, y'all, thank you for that carrier update. Love the weather jokes being put in there, Thomas. Appreciate that. Although if you're anywhere from basically the Dakotas southward, when your high is hitting like -6, you're high, you're not going to be able to thaw out that reefer. Sorry.
I don't like the sounds of that being the high at all. I couldn't imagine living there.
You know, me either, Anthony, and that's why we live in the South. All right, guys, we'll talk a little bit more about that coming up later on. Right now, we're going to welcome Mike Bardendistel with us, of course, our head of intermodal solutions at FreightWaves and our finger on the pulse of the CPG space with the stock out. Mike, thanks for being here. We're going to talk a little bit about Q4 earnings coming in for some rail companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. So it was interesting the last several days. I mean, the railroads, most of the railroads reported in the last week, and, we're so used to having the railroads report and their stocks bounce. They, usually have great performance. This time, they really didn't give investors, I didn't think, a lot to be excited about. Now, it may be, better news for shippers and other constituents, but really, I thought the railroads were pretty cautious on the economy. Like, I'll give you an example of this, is Union Pacific's basing its projections off of industrial production down about 0.5% this year. And usually the railroads have a difficult time growing volume overall when industrial production is down. I thought most of the other companies were sort of cautious on the consumer as well as industrial. Most of the on the intermodal side think that those volumes are going to be, at least they're cautious with the decline in imports and with the weak truckload market. So on the volume side, nothing real exciting. And then the companies are facing all these cost headwinds this year from rising pay, from all the raises that the employees got last year, and various other things, rising equipment rents, those type of things. So, didn't think that it was great from an investor perspective. Maybe the company that sort of stood out as looking pretty good were some of the suppliers, like, GATX's business looks pretty good. They're a big company that leases rail cars, one of the biggest rail car leasing companies. So rail cars are still sort of in short supply. Part of that's because of the sort of poor rail service, so it makes the cars out in the field get utilized less efficiently. But really what the Class 1 railroads talked a lot about was service, sort of various ways to improve service. Union Pacific mentioned that they're running looser on crews, and that was maybe the one line that stood out last week as really taking note of this. And this, something has changed in the rail industry that it just, they said maybe a few hundred extra employees, not thousands. Keep in mind this company has 30,000 total employees. Not sure exactly how many of those are craft employees, but they said that they're going to have more employees than they typically would have, because it's difficult to train, hire employees when the volumes rise, which is something that they struggled with during the pandemic. They blamed a lot of the service issues on not having sufficient employees. And I do think that makes, from sort of financial perspective, that makes the company have more operating leverage, that the margins will rise and fall a little bit more they'll fall more if volumes decline, if they're running heavier on crews. But I think ultimately that's what they sort of have to do to improve the service. Did mention that, okay, maybe this should help them be able to grow the volume, to have more of those resources in place. But it did sort of mark a sea change from my perspective. And then another interesting thing that came out last week was Canadian National Railroad mentioned that they're running some shorter trains in order to keep the trains onto a schedule. So much of the last several years, you've heard about the railroads run increasingly long train sizes in order to maximize the efficiency of fuel, of locomotive productivity, of just overall cost efficiency. But running those sort of shorter trains, even if, say, the example they gave was, they'll cut a train if it's 40 cars, even though it would normally be 100 cars, just because it needs to keep to a certain schedule, which would lend itself to better service. And so it did seem like the railroads were maybe presenting themselves to broader audience, including the Surface Transportation Board. A lot of these hearings in Washington, D.C., they've brought up, word for word what these companies have said to investors in these public meetings, and said, well, this is contrary to providing good customer service. So it did seem like the railroads were very cautious to not have any of those sound bites that could be used against them in Washington, D.C.
So, Mike, you mentioned the close tie between intermodal and truckload volume, and we know that the last kind of 2.5 years, we heard a lot of talk about intermodal being that overflow valve for the really constrained truckload capacity. Obviously, now the last 9 months have been unkind to that truckload capacity, but we're starting to see maybe a little bit of an upswing. Our CEO and founder, Craig Fuller, just wrote an article over the weekend talking about this uptick in volumes and maybe a little bit of a recovery on the way. It's going to be a while before, if that happens and materializes, intermodal sees that as well. Do you think that we could be looking out maybe to the second half and even maybe the fourth quarter of 2023 before we start to see some of that materialize on the intermodal side of things?
Yeah, so I don't think there's any need for intermodal to be a relief valve right now with plenty of truckload capacity. I mean, yes, the volume have picked up that we see in the tender data. There's still plenty of capacity to absorb that. I think the intermodal is really going to fill in more where the products are not time sensitive or when they're really sort of long length of haul. You think some of these imports from LA to Chicago and onward. But, really, I think the weak truckload market puts a lot of pressure on the intermodal volume because the truckers are going to want to have those trucks filled, and they might, take loads that, would otherwise, go to intermodal. I think it makes it difficult for intermodal rates to go higher this year when you've already seen the truckload contract rates that we see in the Sonar data. Those have already come down. Intermodal really haven't seen it yet. It's sort of in line with year ago levels, but a lot of those contracts will get renegotiated, repriced in the first part of the year. First quarter into second quarter, most of them are completed by April and May. But there, I would expect those to come down. I don't think those are as volatile as the truckload contract rates, but they sort of move directionally together. I mean, one of the data series that we have that compares the spread between truckload and intermodal shows it about 10% right now, which is sort of at the low end of the range. You sort of think of 10 to 15% as being the average, and at times it sort of creeps higher than that. So I do think it's going to put pressure on intermodal rates.
And Mike, one of the things that you mentioned earlier, of course, was around industrial production. Some of the companies watching that and having a lowered expectation going forward. Were there any subcategories or industries within industrial production that maybe is showing some overt weakness? I know automotive is definitely one that ticked down in the last industrial production report. Are there any things that were kind of cited from that?
Yeah, I mean, they're really cautious on lumber. I think they're expecting the housing starts to come way down. They said metals were okay. So some of the pieces of like machinery and those types of big capital equipment, I think they're maybe thinking okay. But anything I think related to lumber, housing materials, they're expecting all of those things to be weak. Actually, automotive, some of the railroads actually think those are going to be strong volumes because there's kind of a pent up demand there, and some of the supply chains have elongated where. A lot more are being produced in Mexico. There's a lot of auto parts that are brought in through like Port of Vancouver. So they actually think the motor vehicle volume should hold up.
That's definitely insightful and good to know there. And when we're looking at the overall industry, of course, consumers are going to have some part in that as well. You also have a CPG show and People Speaking Rail. Can you tell us a little bit about where we can find you and what you might be covering in the upcoming series?
Sure. So the stock out is this afternoon at 2:00 Eastern time. I think we have a really great show tonight. It's with Ben Ritchie, who does the logistics for Black Rifle Coffee Company, fast-growing company. They do a lot of D2C. It's a company that supports veterans. They've taken a lot of market share. So an exciting one. Is a lot of challenges I think are sort of unique to a fast-growing consumer products company. There. And so that can be found today at 2:00 Eastern time. And then I do a show on Thursdays at 3:00 Eastern time, People Speaking Rail, with Joanna Marsh. And we talk about whatever we feel like is the topic of the hour, and have some guests pending. One of them is Dan Elliott, who is the former chairman of the Surface Transportation Board. He's now works at a law firm assisting shippers with a lot of the issues that they run into when shipping on the railroad. So I think there's going to be a lot of good content there as well.
Awesome, Mike. Looking forward to both of those. And thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Great. Good to see you.
Awesome. Right now, we're going to head over to the wall because we have Kaylee Nix back with another weather update.
All right, Anthony, thank you for that. And we're going to continue to dive a little bit deeper on this pretty big winter storm that's going to be having impacts from central Texas all the way up through the Midwest and the Southern Plains. We're going to stay focused on Texas and Oklahoma for this next look at the weather, specifically because we're looking at a pretty significant ice event with an ice storm impending for those states. Let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. These are our precipitation expected totals up for the next day or so on the map. You can see the actual amount of rainfall isn't going to be too much. When we overlay it with expected snowfall, it's also not too much. But this is interesting because we don't necessarily need a lot of precipitation falling to get some pretty big impacts. We can see that everywhere from south central Texas, the I-20 and I-10 corridors moving up to the north-northeast, and then the Dallas-Fort Worth metro and just to the east of the metro as well. It's pretty much bullseyed with some decently heavy rainfall, about a ½ inch to an inch in some spots. And when this falls, the surface temperatures are going to be just at freezing. And because of the way that it works, we've got some different changes in the temperatures in the upper levels of the atmosphere. So we'll have snow that falls and then hits a layer of the atmosphere, turns into rain, and then is already super cooled. So when you hit that just freezing temperature at the surface, it flash freezes onto any of those surfaces that are down there. So bridges, roads, power lines, trees, cars, you name it, we'll see some icing going on there from that storm. So we're only looking at total about an inch or so of falling precip, but we can be expecting about 3/4 of an inch to an inch, even an inch and a half in some places of total ice accumulation from this storm. So because of that, we do have winter storm warnings in place for the entire Dallas-Fort Worth metro, down the I-35 corridor into Austin and just outside of San Antonio, the I-20 corridor all the way just from the east of, or the west of Midland, that is, I-20 up through Abilene into that metroplex is going to be underneath that winter storm warning. So travel there going to be difficult, potentially impossible in some spots starting this morning, lasting all the way into the start of Wednesday morning. With that, the Arctic air is already in place, and so as we feed more moisture into it, the precipitation impacts just only going to continue to accumulate. We'll talk about what the storm will do as it moves farther east coming up in our second hour of the show. Right now, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Let's go. Nobody works for free, so why should we be expecting our drivers to? Okay, let's just get it together now. What are some of those proactive steps that you can start taking now? For myself, I would like the Earth to still be here for a little bit longer, but you know, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, okay. Is pizza an open-faced sandwich? It's bread.
I have been ready for this question. I've seen the show.
We're all in this together.
Thanks for making me hungry. Now I want a hot dog.
You're welcome. Catch episodes of Check Call Tuesdays at 12:30 on FreightWaves TV. Keep up with all things Check Call on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked.
People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation. This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and this is Social Roundabout, where we take a look at what's trending on social media. Well, if you haven't heard of Mr. Beast, he's one of the most subscribed YouTubers on that platform. He has 130 million subscribers. He does all types of challenges for people to earn money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And yesterday, he posted a video of helping 1,000 people who were blind get the ability to see. He paid for 1,000 people to pay for their surgery so that they could see. He posted this video on his YouTube channel, and it shows 1,000 people who were all blind. They all have different stories. Some have been blind their entire lives. Some started becoming blind as they got older, and some, all of them just have a lot of different stories. And you can see the expression on a lot of these patients' faces that when they first got to see, like this lady right here, just how excited she gets. It's such an amazing thing that Mr. Beast did right here, giving these people the ability to see. And on top of doing this, he also gave a lot of people $10,000 that he also paid for their surgery. So just a really cool thing that he did. And apparently, according to the video, it talks about how the surgery is actually really simple. It takes 10 minutes. People's eyes get so clogged up, and they just use a tiny vacuum to pull out everything to help them be able to see. So really cool thing that Mr. Beast did. If you're not following him, make sure you give him a follow on YouTube or a subscribe. He always posts a lot of really, really good content. And now switching things up a little bit, the biggest stage in football is finally set. The Super Bowl 57 will take place on February the 12th, and it's going to feature the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. The two #1 seeds made their way through the playoffs to mate on the biggest stage. Patrick Mahomes versus Jalen Hurts. You can't ask for a better matchup. Two of the best offenses, some of the best defense in the game. I'm excited to see Patrick Mahomes. I know he's been having some issues with his ankle, but he played really well against the Bengals yesterday. Jalen Hurts has looked great throughout the playoffs. So it's going to be a great matchup, and I'm excited to looking forward to that. It's going to be February 12th on Fox. Make sure you tune in and watch one of the biggest games in football. So right now I'm going to toss things back over to Kaylee and Anthony with a look at what's coming up here in the next few weeks at FreightWaves.
You know, Anthony, this might not be sports, but what's coming up is kind of like our FreightWaves Super Bowl.
It is the Super Bowl of virtual events and the supply chain, and that is Global Supply Chain Week. And unlike the Super Bowl, you can go to this for free.
We can't promise you that you will see Patrick Mahomes or Jalen Hurts sling some impressive passes or, touchdowns and tackles. But you know what? You can find out some really great information about supply chain. And as Anthony mentioned, you don't have to pay for the prizes that you could win.
That's right. You might even leave with something if you get registered, because at that point, you'll be eligible for a giveaway each and every single day of the event. And if you are involved in any part of the supply chain, there's going to be something here for you at this event.
100%. And the lineup is still full of superstars. So make sure that you go ahead and go get registered. Head on over to live.freightwaves.com. And you know what? Maybe if you want to be a superstar and speak at Global Supply Chain Week, let us know. Hit me up. You can email me at knix@freightwaves.com. You can reach out to Tony Mulvey as well and our events coordinator, Jen Wiggins. We would love to get you guys on as part of our guest lineup.
That's right. Can't wait to hear from you, and can't wait to get that networking in, because of course you have to get ahead of our next in-person event. So much stuff to get registered for, and you'll have time to do it as we get into this next break, and we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June. And welcome back to FreightWaves Now on your Monday morning. Starting off our 10 a.m. hour with a look at your top stories on FreightWaves.com this morning. The Surface Transportation Board has responded to several shipper concerns about rail service, including a complaint brought to the board by 8 members of Congress. STB Chairman Marty Oberman acknowledged the frustrations over delays on the UP network, but he did not commit to hosting a hearing on the issue. Union Pacific had issued an initial embargo due to weather on operations in Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin back on December 29th. That embargo was estimated to last 14 days, but has now been in place for over a month. UP said it had lifted the embargo as of last week, noting that there is another winter storm headed for the Midwest this week as well. Tanker investors are watching the market closely to see what happens as sanctions effects on Russian crude oil start to materialize. The decrease in spot rates for tankers has scared off some investors, leading them to question where the bottom of the fall is. But experts say that the current rate environment remains far above long-term averages, and the quote-unquote collapse was just a fall from unsustainably high prices. Voyage distance for tankers is increasing thanks to those sanctions on Russian-born crude, as those shipments move to India instead of to the European Union. On the flip side, the EU is having to buy oil from further away, also adding to that increased voyage distance. Norfolk Southern's industrial investment in 2022 has been valued at about $3.2 billion through partnership with 120 companies. The investments were made for 159 projects to expand operations or create new facilities along the NS network, which is more than 825 development-ready sites. That network also has 300 rail-to-transload facilities and 260 partnerships with short-line railroads in the works. Norfolk Southern has allocated $30 billion for industrial development in this year, with the projects belonging to 33 companies, including one with Hyundai Motor Group. The FDA is moving forward with requirements that would supplement existing nutrition labels on CPG goods. Currently, food and beverage products have black and white nutrition labels on the back of products, but a new rule idea would require a spotlight type of configuration to be placed on the front of packaging to give the consumer a visual cue to the level of health in a serving of the item. The FDA issued a 60-day notice of its plans to conduct a research study on if these types of labels would be effective or not at telling people the nutritional value in their foods. And software company PortPro has raised a $12 million Series A funding round led by Avenue Growth Partners. The company provides a TMS platform to drayage and intermodal carriers and is based out of New Jersey. Avenue Growth Partners co-founder Ryan Russell said that PortPro is uniquely positioned to provide software drayage service to providers in order to help their port operations. And PortPro CEO Michael Mecca said that they are committed to the drayage community. This fund will help them continue that commitment. You can find details on these headlines and so much more by heading on over to FreightWaves.com. Give us a like and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube today, and a follow if you are with us on social media. And of course, you can head on over to tv.freightwaves.com to catch up on anything that you might have missed from today. We're going to toss things back over to Thomas Wasson and Donnie Gilbert. We've got our next carrier update.
Thanks so much, Kaylee. Welcome to our third carrier update here. I'm Thomas Wasson, joined by Donnie Gilbert, of course. Talked a little bit about reefers earlier. We had graphs, but now we have maps.
Yes, sir. Graphs to maps. So what I got pulled up here is I got our 1 week change in reefer rejection rates over top of our volumes. So the red means reefer rejection rates have gone down. Blue means reefer rejection rates have gone up. The shade that you see here, this means the deeper the shade, the more volumes. The lower the shades, such as maybe Iowa here, means less reefer volumes. It's always good to look at this week to week to see, because the rejection rates may not change as much, the national may not change as much, but you might have a lot of markets where rejection rates are going down, a lot of markets where rejection rates are going up, and they kind of balance out. And then you can't really tell what's hot and what's not. So one that really sticks out right here, Indianapolis. I always love the Indianapolis market, whether drive-in or reefer. It always seems to be fairly strong. Arkansas sees some increases here in rejection rates. The Chattanooga market, where we are, Atlanta, no change, not bad, just hasn't gone up or down from last week to this week. And a little bit of rise there out there on the West Coast. So always good to see this to where you can know what's changing. One of my other favorite markets right here is Savannah as well.
And I think that's a great tool to use, because when you're trying to make these decisions, volume matters, but also movement. So if you know that you've got something going inbound to a market, maybe in Atlanta, but looking at the surrounding areas, maybe you can get that opportunity to try to get a little more because of that volatility.
Exactly. So let's kind of look at one or two of these markets here right quick. Next chart here. Looking at Indianapolis here, we see blue line, we see volumes are increasing. It's not a very huge reefer market, but rejection rates have climbed up to 16.39%. In a national average of the 5.7, we see one market with 16%. Got some pretty good volumes there. This is a market that I may be trying to aim my trucks towards. Number one, I know there's a lot of freight. Number two, the rates are going to be probably a little bit better. And we'll test this theory on the market dashboard in our last episode here. All right, next market here. I've got Allentown, PA. Now in Allentown, volumes have dropped some, just a little bit, but still fairly strong on volumes, and our rejection rates, you see again, they're climbing. Now, they've only climbed up to 5.8%, not a huge 5.8%. That's not extremely well like 16. But it was down here below 2.5%. So in the last 10 days, we've seen it go from 2.5 to 5.8. So something's changing, something's happening. In a market that's this large, it takes quite a bit to start changing these percentage rates. So this is another one to keep your eye on and go in and maybe test it out, which we'll also do here using our market dashboard.
Perfect. That's such a fun market to look at, because, I mean, Allentown, Wilkes-Barre, a lot of those parts in PA, geography also helps explain some of this lag time in terms of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, and I call that the belt there. In that little beltway, a lot of those markets supply the entire Northeast. So once you cross that beltway, it's hard to get out, but a lot of this freight's going to deliver up in. Let's check out the next chart here right quick as we go on here real quick here. Looking at the National Truckload Index, the average rate of spot rates, it's picked up here over the weekend a little bit to 2.56%. Reefer rejection rate contracts for the first half of January, still climbing, so something to keep an eye on as well this week.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Donnie. That's going to be it for our third look at the carrier update, of course, but we'll be back for one more time. In the meantime, let's toss it back over to Kaylee and Anthony for our next guest.
All right, guys, thank you again for that. We're going to welcome in our Borderlands reporter, Noi Mahoney, to talk a little bit about the rise and success of the Port of Laredo. Noi, thank you for joining us today. We obviously know that Laredo has done a fantastic job, honestly becoming one of the biggest and most busiest ports along the U.S.-Mexico border, definitely for automotives, but especially for agriculture. Talk to us a little bit about what the numbers show.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. Well, Mexican produce is here to stay. And one of the great beneficiaries of that is Port Laredo and most of the ports here in South Texas. According to a new review from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Port Laredo was responsible for 40% of U.S. agriculture exports to Mexico, and was also responsible for 52% of imports of agriculture coming from Mexico to the U.S. And this includes everything from, avocados, tomatoes, berries, broccoli. So there's all kinds of things that, we find in our supermarket that we're getting from Mexican growers.
And excuse me, Noi, as we look at the borderland area, are there any other ports that could even start to challenge Laredo's really dominance in the area, or do we see Laredo only getting bigger and stronger as the years go on?
The port of Nogales in Arizona is also very strong, and I think they've been left behind just a little bit by Laredo. They don't like to hear that down in Arizona because I know them. They're really good people down there, but I think Laredo just has a little bit more infrastructure, in terms of where cold storage warehouses, more lanes for trucks. So right now, Laredo is sort of moving ahead of other ports. But another strong port for agricultural trade was the port of Otay Mesa in Southern California, which is just south of San Diego. And they're in a massive expansion project right now, in the middle of a massive expansion project. So they could give Laredo a real good run for their money in a few years in terms of, infrastructure and operations and being able to process more trucks. So Laredo is number one right now, but that could change, in a few years.
So Laredo is the termination point of I-35 on the or the Texas-Mexico border. And obviously, that's the direct funnel from the breadbasket of the U.S., right? From the Midwest, where you've got a lot of your corn and your grain. It's the easy endpoint for where that's going through Mexico. But for all of the other things that are exported from the U.S., things that are grown, maybe apples in Washington or things that are grown on the West Coast, is that what's making the Port of Otay Mesa support? It's in the agriculture side too, is just the geographical location of where the goods are coming from versus where it's shortest to move them through?
Yeah, that's a great point. The stuff that we get from the Pacific Northwest, as you mentioned, apples and citrus and those kinds of things, they're probably most likely going through California, south to Mexico through the Port of Otay Mesa. And, and here in Texas, we export a lot of bulk grain to Mexico and oil seeds. I'm not sure what oil seeds are, but apparently that's a very important product that we export. And most of that is exported through, overland port, but also as well as through the Port of New Orleans by, container ships from, New Orleans to Mexico. So as you said, it has to do a lot with geography and what's grown in which part of the United States and what makes most sense for shippers, economically to get it to their end destinations.
So the oilseed thing is fascinating, right? Because you're thinking about exports of like soybeans and sunflowers and peanuts being exported to make now seed oils out of those, and then seed oils come back into the U.S. to produce a lot of our foods that are manufactured here. When we look at tracking those type of exports, imports, is there any numbers that look at kind of like the net balance of that? Like say, we export 3 tons of soybeans through the Port of Laredo, and then 4 tons of soybean oil comes back to us. Is there any type of number that tracks that kind of relationship?
I didn't see any numbers in the latest report from the USDA, but I think you're pretty close on it's almost a net even. You know what I mean? Like, as you said, we export so much oil seeds, and then they turn around and process it and send it back to the U.S. as maybe cooking oil or other stuff we use to make our foods. So I would guess that it's somewhere close to being a net even, but I'd have to check on that. That's a great question.
And excuse me, no, we see a lot of headwinds. A lot of tailwinds for Laredo. Are there any headwinds potentially as we move forward into the next few years for something that would potentially hinder or slow down their growth?
Laredo, they've been trying to expand their road system. Right now, as Kaylee mentioned earlier, everything goes to Interstate 35, and there's only so many lanes, right now that they have going north from Laredo. And what happens is, when these trucks go through the Port of Laredo, sometimes they get backed up trying to get to 35 or trying to get to the other roads that lead out of Laredo right now. And the city of Laredo and the state of Texas has been trying to put together a package to expand the road system heading out of that city, which is really important. It's important for all the ports down here in Texas, El Paso, Laredo, Far Texas, to be able to not just get trucks through the port, but get them out of those locations, quickly and safely to wherever their end destination in the United States may be.
So, Noi, then you also mentioned the flip side, the Mexican imports, or the Mexican exports, becoming U.S. imports. What types of things are we importing right now from Mexico? So avocados is something that's pretty big, right? Are we looking at other fruits, other types of vegetables, cruciferous things like that?
It's everything you can think of: lemons, limes, mangoes. This isn't fruits and vegetables, but one of the things I thought was interesting is we also import a lot of gin, vodka, and rum, and tequila and beer. So we're importing all kinds of stuff that I guess the U.S. loves Mexican produce and loves Mexican liquor and beer.
And Noi, you had another story that you put out not too long ago, late last week, around stolen equipment happening in Mexico. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yeah, that was interesting. The percentage of cargo trucks being hijacked and stolen in 2002 went up. I forgot the exact number. I don't have it in front of me, but it went up pretty significantly. And it's been a problem that, freight customs brokers and people who work in trade have been telling me this all year, that the Mexican government or even the state government needs to do more to police the roadways, to protect drivers and this cargo that they're transporting. It's been a problem for years, and 2022 was one of the worst years, according to data that the Mexican truck industry has had in quite a while.
And you note Kenworth and Freightliner as being some of the most stolen trucks there. Do you see this as a potential headwind for a lot of potential nearshoring efforts as we see stories like this pop up from time to time?
It could be, in the sense that there's that worry that, if we put a factory in Mexico and we're trying to transport, auto parts being one of the items that was listed as being hijacked quite frequently this past year. So for shippers, they want to have that sense of security that if we put our factory in Mexico and we're sending our goods to the U.S., that it won't be disturbed or hijacked. And so I've talked to, like I said, customs brokers, people who work in trade, and there just needs to be, in their opinion, there needs to be more security on the roadways, more protection for their cargo going north, and even for cargo going southbound. But right now, there is that sense of worry that, as you say, could be tailwinds to trade in the future.
Certainly, and definitely something we don't want to see. I'm for sure excited for the potential growth in Mexico and what's to come. Noi, thanks so much for joining us this morning and telling us about this.
Thank you for having me.
Right now, we're going to head back over to the wall because we have Kaylee Nix with a weather update.
All right, Anthony, thank you again. Continuing to talk about the expected winter weather, this time looking a little bit further to the east, across Arkansas and then into Mississippi, into western Tennessee as well. We already have ice storm warnings in place, specifically from Little Rock up through Memphis along the I-30 and I-40 corridors there. As travel between Memphis and Little Rock is going to be difficult, if not impossible, starting off this afternoon, this evening, and working in through your Tuesday into Wednesday. Let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. We can see that we've got the radar on with some precipitation falling across central Texas right now. It looks like most of this is falling as snow, but that's just because of the fact that the radar looks so high up in the atmosphere. Most of this is actually starting off as snow, running through a melting layer and then hitting the ground as freezing rain or sleet, that line between the liquid and frozen precip. But as we look further out towards the east, we do have a little bit of a warmer air mass in place at the surface level, which means that the ice accumulation is going to be way more impactful here. We'll see less of rain-snow mix and more of just a straight freezing rain. So because of that, we've got ice storm warnings in place, including Little Rock, through the I-40 corridor that runs into Memphis, and then down south I-55 headed down towards the central parts of Mississippi. And with this area that is underneath this ice storm warning, that I-40 corridor between Little Rock and Memphis has a lot of those little tiny bridges that run over kind of those estuaries and those tiny little pieces that feed into the Mississippi River Delta. So this means that travel across I-40 is going to be incredibly difficult. So much of that freezing rain that hits the pavement will have a better chance to freeze because, of course, our bridges freeze faster than those regular roadways do. So travel specifically on that I-40 corridor is going to be very, very slick and very dangerous here these next 2 days or so. Ice storm warnings are in place, and those are expected to remain in place through at least today into tomorrow. And then further out towards the east, that ice storm warning does include the Jackson, Tennessee area, that I-40 corridor moving up towards Nashville. City of Nashville itself is just underneath the winter weather advisory so far. It's much warmer there. We've got temperatures sitting in the mid-40s instead of down right at that freezing mark. So they're expected to keep liquid precipitation here through at least today into tomorrow. Possibly we'll see the snow kind of rain mix moving in on Tuesday afternoon into Tuesday evening. We'll take one final check of the weather here before we're done here for the day. But right now we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation. This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
And welcome back to FreightWaves Now on this Monday morning. Of course, at FreightWaves, you know us here on FreightWaves TV, but we also have a daily radio show on the SiriusXM platform, normally hosted by my illustrious friend Grace Sharkey, but once in a while we get the pleasure of having Thomas Wasson on the show. That's what you get this week is Grace's at Manifest. So Thomas is going to be here with me to talk a little bit about what to expect on his edition of Road Dog Radio. Thomas, what have we got this week coming up?
So get excited here, folks. We're going to have Marilyn Serber with 10th Street on for Monday. I'm hosting Monday and Friday. Grace will be from the event. I think she's setting up at
Live Manifest.
It's going to be a lot more fun. I'll be at my kitchen table hanging out in Chattanooga. So we have a very professional setup as my cat walks across the keyboard. But get excited. The folks at 10th Street, we're going to try to talk with Marilyn about some of the trends, what she's seeing. There's a lot of fascinating stuff with drivers. And then on Tuesday, I'm going to have the folks with Redwood, Eric Rimple, as well as Surge Transportation's very own Omar Sin. And then Wednesday, of course, Ashley Savage from Coop. Coop's got some cool stuff going on, of course. You definitely want to hear from them. I spoke with a gentleman there a little while ago, and they got some cool stuff. You can invest in trailers.
Yeah, which is cool.
Put my money to work as it puts itself to work. And then Thursday, of course, I'm going to have the folks at Kodiak, James Reed, Grace will be talking with them, as well as Mark Lavelle from Malergo. Friday, I'm going to get some guests. You can email us or even email me or Bill or whoever we have that normally does it, because I'm going to be filling it up. It's going to be FreightWaves Drive Time, of course, here on SiriusXM channel 146. Now, we normally do it 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern on Monday through Fridays, but do not fret, though. I think it comes on like at 11 afterwards. It's like replay.
Yeah, yep. We've got a 2-hour rerun that runs from 11 to 1 a.m. Eastern time. So maybe if you're asleep at your hours of service from 5 to 7 and then you're running in the late night, that's fine. You can catch up and catch late nights with Thomas Wasson. Thomas, maybe I can come on this week for Friday. We can talk a little bit about the ice storm that's going on, maybe recap some impacts about what happened.
Oh, definitely. Ice road truckers, what goes on with ice and like how to deal with it. There's a lot of drivers. I spoke with one at a company, and he'd been driving for 20-something years, never had to put chains in his truck. And some of those, I'm impressed because that's pretty much below 40 or 40 or below, and they avoided it for that long. It's quite a feat.
You're staying either I-40 or below, and then eastward of I-35 then.
Exactly.
That's about it. All right, Thomas, well, thank you for that. As you mentioned, people can catch at SiriusXM channel 146, Road Dog Radio, and then Grace will be back on Tuesday live from Vegas at the Manifest Conference. Also with that, I'm solo on Great Quarter Gals this week because she will be hosting a panel at Manifest during that time. So make sure that you stay tuned in for that one. We're going to go ahead and take another quick break, and we'll be right back in just a few minutes.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
It's a good day coming.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation, inflation, inflation. this is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
And welcome back for our final check of the weather, and we are continuing to talk about that storm. The understated thing that we can't focus enough on is going to be the flooding threat and the impacts that will come from the influx of moisture off of the Gulf Coast as this storm pulls up to the north-northeast. So let's check that out in Sonar Critical Events. This is our forecast precipitation from days 1, so that's today through day 5, so ending on Friday. We can see really this gives us just a good idea of where that heaviest amount of rain is going to fall. Most of this here in the heavier spots will fall as that liquid rain content. The freezing line will sit just above where this heaviest rainfall is. But because we're seeing this much rain, that's what's going to give enough fuel to see the really impactful winter weather on the cold side of the storm. So what we're going to be watching, especially through day 3 through 5, so Thursday, Wednesday into Friday, we're going to be watching a really heavy band of rain set up just to the northeast of the Houston Metroplex. Most of that is going to filter along up to the northeast through the I-20 corridor across Louisiana and into southern Mississippi. Same thing as you look out towards the east, south central Georgia, so from Macon and then along the 75-16 corridors there, can be expecting some heavy rainfall, total rainfall amounts between about 3 to 5 inches in some of these spots. Because we are on the warm side of the storm here, all of this will fall as liquid rain. This is going to be good news because it means we won't see the impacts of the frozen precipitation, but will still be pretty impactful because it will have some flooding impacts, especially as the storm that dumps the cold precip upstream will melt and then send that water downstream into those areas where you're seeing the heavy rainfall. So you can catch flooding issues not only from the rain that's falling, but also from the runoff from things that live upstream of this rainfall that's going on. So again, we're looking at day 3 to 5 here, or day 1 to 5 here. Day 3 to 5 going to be the most impactful as far as actual rain rates go. Biggest areas to watch out for will be East Texas from the Houston area eastward through Beaumont, then southeastern Louisiana into south central Mississippi. That's going to be what to expect on the warm side of the storm. North side going to be that cold precip, freezing rain, icy conditions, and ice storms going on across there. That's it for the weather today. We'll continue to follow the storm as it develops tomorrow and into the rest of the week. Right now, we'll toss things back over to Isaiah Buchanan for a final check of what's trending on social media.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan. If you haven't heard of Mr. Beast, he's one of the most popular YouTubers out there. He has 130 million subscribers. And yesterday he posted a video where he showed off paying for the cataract surgery of over 1,000 people. And this is a really cool thing that he did. He talked to one of the eye doctors, and he said that half of all blindness could be cured with just a 10-minute cataract surgery. So Mr. Beast paid for 1,000 people. I mean, just look at the joy on the patients' faces after being able to see. A lot of the patients have different stories. Some have been blind a majority of their lives. Some had gotten blind as they progressed and gotten older. So just a really cool thing that he did. He also gave some of the patients $10,000 on top of paying for their surgery. So this video is the #1 video on YouTube right now. It's got 46 million views just since yesterday. And that's actually on the low end for Mr. Beast. A lot of his videos are getting around 150 million to 200 million views. But just a shout out to Mr. Beast doing a really good work. Happy that a lot of people are now able to see for the first time in who knows how long, maybe their whole lives, or maybe here just recently. So a really cool thing that he did. Now, switching things up a little bit, football's biggest stage has been set. Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs will meet in a little less than 2 weeks for Super Bowl 57 in Arizona. The two teams are the #1 seeds in both the AFC and the NFC, and they have made their way through the playoffs to meet in the biggest stage in football. So it's going to be a really good game. Patrick Mahomes versus Jalen Hurts. I really think the matchup to watch in this game is going to be Kansas City's defensive backs versus the wide receivers of the Philadelphia Eagles. So keep an eye out for that. That game will be coming up in 2 weeks, February 12th on Fox at 6:30 Eastern Time. So get your popcorn ready, get your wings ready. It's going to be a showdown. That's all I have for this edition of Social Roundabout. Right now, I'm going to toss things back over to Bill Priestley for our roundtable.
And welcome into the Roundtable. Bill Priestley here with you. And we're going to talk about the state of freight here today. And we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of the Washington elite and those who are perhaps inside the Beltway and know more than those of us that live outside the Beltway. Joining us, we have Lauren Smith, president of Skyline Policy Risk Group, and also Randy Mullet, senior advisor at Imaginivate. And both these gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here. You guys know the inside tracks. I've got 5 topics here. I'm sure we could do this segment on one of them in its entirety, but a lot to talk about. First off, I think the elephant in the room has got to be the debt ceiling, and in terms of what's going to be going on with that, in terms of how it's going to be resolved. I'm not necessarily concerned about how it's going to be resolved, but what happens if it's not resolved in the time that it's supposed to be, and what can shippers, what can carriers do if in case they have to prepare for that kind of event? Lauren, let me start with you. What's your take on if this thing doesn't resolve the way it should, hopefully?
Well, I appreciate it, Bill. I mean, to be honest, I'm a little bit more sanguine about it. It's definitely going to create a lot of headline risk, and I think probably some market moving risk over the next few months. But it's worth noting that we've already breached the debt ceiling. The U.S. government has already gone over what is technically the statutory debt limit of $31 trillion and change. And so now we're into what's called extraordinary measures. The U.S. Treasury Department has begun moving money around, shifting money from credit card to credit card to make sure that external payments continue for several months. Now, technically, the extraordinary measure is expiring what's known as an X date. So sometime this summer, the Treasury is going to say, look, we've shuffled money from credit card to credit card, and we just can't do it anymore. However, we've never actually gotten to that point where Treasury said we don't have any more extraordinary measures. We don't have any more ability to move things around. And so if that's happened, that's where potentially we could get into a default situation. Again, we've never actually done that as a country, so we don't really know what the extent of those extraordinary measures is or what the real deadline is. But right now, Treasury is saying it could be as early as late June.
Randy, if things unfortunately don't unfold the way hopefully the American public and the American business sector would like them to, what should they be prepared for?
Well, if I was advising a company, I would tell them don't burn a lot of calories on this. There's a lot of headline news. There's a lot of the biggest impact on us is it keeps Congress from doing stuff they ought to be doing. And those are things that are serious to the freight industry, in energy policy, advancing new budgets, doing things that need to happen for our businesses to be successful. I think on the downside, this drags out for 6 months. I don't see us going into default. This is a high-level game of chicken right now, which I think that they'll resolve. I do think that it does have the potential to impact markets and by extension, interest rates and may affect people's borrowing. But again, if I was advising top-level folks at most companies, I would just say don't burn a lot of calories on this.
Gotcha. Let me switch gears. Randy, let me stay with you here. The Ship It Act coming out got bipartisan support in Congress on the House and the Senate side to try and improve issues around parking, safety, and licensing. This bill kind of came out of nowhere, though. I do remember, do remember seeing a bill of similar name that came out in last year. But your impressions of what this bill is and what it could possibly do in the trucking industry.
So this bill could be very meaningful in 2 big ways. I mean, parking aside, that will happen. It just takes a while to develop all that, even if Congress passed this bill tomorrow. The things that are really meaningful are what it does for continuing to allow small business truckers to stay in business. It provides some very nice incentives for people that aren't at the top end of the wage scale yet, as far as small business owners. And there's also a lot of incentives and tax credits, refunds, and outright money for people to go into the trucking industry to get their CDLs and become successful in our space. So I think it's a really important bill, and it could have a big impact on something that we've talked about for years, which is driver shortage and shoring up the I shouldn't say the weakest among us, but shoring up small business carriers.
Gotcha. Yeah. Lauren, this doesn't seem to have a negative aspect to it. Do you see anything bad about this particular bill and any possible thing that could stop it from going through?
Well, unfortunately, the inertia on the downside as far as getting it through is always a challenge. But I think the upsides are, Randy, I agree with everything you said, and then the last thing you said, their driver shortage, I think is very important too. This is a quality of life issue for a lot of the truckers, and so definitely is something that helps small business truckers, but for companies of any size who are struggling to get workers in. If you could have the government actually do something productive in terms of improving the quality of life, making it easier for parking and other issues that the truckers deal with. Improving the quality of life means improving the ability to retain truckers that are already in the industry. As far as Congress goes, I do think that the inertia of anything that involves additional permitting or spending money. I mean, we talked about the debt ceiling just a minute ago. Are you going to have what sort of cuts to spending programs could take place that make it harder for, say, the Department of Transportation to distribute additional grants or for states to spend additional money? I mean, I think that's the sort of question of any sort of new initiative could really be hamstrung if you're talking about a situation in which the overall federal government might be tightening its belt a little bit. Now, I would say this is a priority area that deserves to be funded ahead maybe of some other programs, but you have hundreds and hundreds of different programs that are competing for dollars, and creating a new program in this environment. I think that's probably the biggest challenge right now. But I would say if you have, a solid bipartisan proposal on something like this that's finally made it into a legislative draft form, I would say that's promising. So I think there's a decent chance that it could be done this year as part of one of the deals or other.
Randy, let me switch gears a little bit. One of the things that got a lot of headlines earlier this year, and perhaps still is getting a lot of positive attention, some negative attention, was the FTC's announcement about possibly banning non-competes. And I know they're in the comment period right now. There's the question of whether they can do it or not with the major questions doctrine. Do they have the power to do this kind of thing? What are you hearing inside Washington about the possibility of this becoming a reality, even though there's obviously possibly going to be a massive legal fights between now and seeing it come to fruition?
What we're hearing inside of Washington from every major trade association in D.C. is that they have formed a coalition and are prepared to fight this tooth and nail. Mm-hmm. I personally believe that they're overstepping their bounds as far as their authority goes in this area. But be that as may, they could still do it and create a legal fight. I think at the end of the day, this is one of those things that will end up reverting back to state law. California's got some pretty tight things around this already. But to try to nationalize it, I think is a bridge too far. And I believe that it already has significant opposition.
Lauren, what's your take on this?
Well, it's an interesting, comment potentially on the state of the worker shortage generally, where things like non-competes, if that's something that individual workers are pushing for, that just tends to tilt the policy making playing field over time, and so. I think Randy makes an excellent point about the legislation, but sometimes society just, gradually shifts in a certain direction. And, when there are fewer workers and more, we're hiring signs out there, it just creates a gravitational effect where maybe this is the sort of direction that we're moving in. Although I would look for unintended consequences too. Is this going to negatively impact compensation for workers? If workers are not able to provide a thing of value that is their promise not to compete, does that mean that is that going to negatively affect the ability of workers to get paid? Are they going to get paid less because they can't promise that they're not going to leave tomorrow and go work for a competitor? How does that all shake out in terms of compensation for workers? So I'd be curious how if there are going to be unintended consequences like that.
Yeah, there's definitely two sides to the coin here there as well. There's some excellent points. We've got about a minute left here, Randy. We've talked about these three issues. We have talked about a myriad of others, but past the debt ceiling, past maybe the major top issues of the day in Washington, maybe what is the next best thing or the next thing that Congress should be focusing on past the major issue, maybe some bill or some idea that is not getting the headlines necessarily?
So I personally think that they should be focused on energy policy. I mean, this is a huge, huge issue for our industry. It's a huge, huge issue for the country. Last week, the administration released a blueprint for national decarbonization of the transportation sector. And if we let that be the driving force around it, it's going to cost our industry and our country an awful lot of money.
Gotcha.
So I
let
think
me get you up there because we're just running out of time. Sorry, Lauren, let me get your take on this really quickly.
Farm bill. Congress is doing a new farm bill this year, and the FAA reauthorization, the Federal Aviation Administration. It doesn't touch on trucks exactly, but you've got a lot of air freight issues and a lot of intermodal things that may affect our airports.
Washington is indeed a busy place. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having us.
All right, we'll take a short break, and we'll be back right after this.
The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
All right, welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for one final check of headlines before we get out of here on your Monday morning. The FDA is moving forward with requirements that would supplement existing nutrition labels on CPG goods. Currently, food and beverage products have black and white nutrition labels on the back of products, but a new rule idea would require a colored stoplight type of configuration to be placed on the front of packaging to give the consumer a visual cue in the level of health in the serving of an item. The FDA issued a 60-day notice of its plans to conduct research on if those types of labels would be effective or not at telling people the nutritional value in their foods. Software company PortPro has raised a $12 million Series A funding round led by Avenue Growth Partners. The company provides a TMS platform to drayage and intermodal carriers and is based out of New Jersey. Avenue Growth Partners co-founder Ryan Russell said that PortPro is uniquely positioned to provide software to drayage service providers to help their operations. And PortPro CEO Michael Mecca said that they are committed to the drayage community. This will help them continue that commitment. And Air France KLM has said that it will order 4 additional A350 wide-body freighters from Airbus to be operated by subsidiary airline Marinair. The order will replace 4 Boeing 747 cargo jets currently operated by KLM Cargo and Marinair. The planes will be based at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport and are expected to be delivered in the second half of 2026. Last April, Air France finalized a deal for the initial 4 A350 freighters, a new product that is scheduled to enter service for the first time for Qatar Airways at the end of 2025. And you can find those headlines and so much more over at FreightWaves.com. And of course, in our FreightWaves app, head on over to tv.freightwaves.com to catch anything that you might have missed from today or anything else on FreightWaves TV. And of course, you can always give us a follow on social media and a like to stay updated. Right now, we'll hand things back over to Thomas Wasson and Donnie Gilbert for our final carrier update.
Thank you so much, Kaylee. Welcome to our final carrier update. Donnie, earlier we've been talking about a little bit of reefer madness today, but of course, the most important part, the piece de resistance, of course, actual data as well on what to quote.
So we have Indianapolis. I said it going to Kansas City. It's a 482-mile run, right around that 500-mile mark is what I feel comfortable with. Turn our reefer on there and turn our NTI on to be able to compare to that. And of course, we see where they've been declining over the past couple of weeks, but still at $3.11 heading from Indianapolis out to Kansas City, well above our spot rate average of $2.56. Now, even though we say right now $3.11, the average is between $2.93 and $3.31. But we have a lot of events coming up right now that might help push this rate up. Number one, we're at the end of the month. We got a lot of weather in between there. So this might be a good time right now for carriers to start actually pushing those spot rates up right now because they can. Now, hit a little double arrows button there and turn it around. Kansas City coming back. Again, it's been declining, but it just picked up a little bit to $3.51. So you actually might want to accept more loads going into Kansas City over Indianapolis if you have that choice, knowing that you might be able to get out of Kansas City paying a little bit better than Indianapolis. Or if you're on this lane specifically, maybe run Kansas City or Indianapolis to Kansas City on contract, then Kansas City back on spot rate at $3.51. Next lane here, let's pop in here and look at Kansas City headed all the way over to Allentown. We talked about Allentown. It is a 1,100-mile trip here, and we're running at $3.72 per mile. So still a very strong rate, almost $4 a mile. Again, a lot of weather in between there, so it gives you some opportunities to push those rates up and the end of the month. And the return trip, hit a little double arrows there. Allentown coming back, well, leaving the Northeast, $2.13. So Allentown to Kansas City might be your contracted rate, and then maybe try to turn that truck around and use that $3.70 rate as your backhaul.
Exactly, and trying to make sure as well how you're quoting, how far in advance you're quoting. Even though, we have a confidence score of 5 of 5, also pay attention to time of day of booking, because brokers generally make 50% more margins 24 to 48 hours in advance.
Yeah, so as a carrier, you be careful with those brokers. But this, like I say, the later it is allows you to push those rates up for spot, or use this as well to figure out which direction you want to run for your contract. Let's look at one more here right quick. Chicago headed to Atlanta, just another fun, totally different, headed Midwest to Southeast. Again, we've seen declining through the latter part of January, but still running at $3.68 per mile. So use your market dashboard. You can still find a lot of lanes, a lot of freight that's around that $3.50 mark, or even better. But again, we see rates deteriorating, so there's still a lot of rates that are far below that.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Donnie. That's going to be it for our care update. Join us tomorrow, though. We'll be back, and Tony Melvey will be taking my place. We're going to toss it back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
All right, guys, we are done here for the day on FreightWaves Now, but plenty more coming up on FreightWaves TV for the rest of your Monday.
That's right. It's Monday, so that means we get to have What the Truck in just about an hour. And we heard from Mike Bardendistel a little bit earlier on. We're going to hear him from again at the Stockout, and he's going to have an amazing guest joining him.
And maybe you're busy today during noon to 1 or 2 to 3. That's okay. You can head on over to tv.freightwaves.com, catch reruns and anything that you might have missed from today on demand. While you're over there, you might as well drop into our State of Freight webinar that we had last Thursday, with Zach Strickland, our head of market intelligence, and FreightWaves founder and CEO Craig Fuller. If you missed that one, it was super informative. I highly suggest you go and check that out.
That's right. And of course, if you have some time, you can get registered for an upcoming virtual event. So there's still time for that. And of course, it is free to do so. That's going to do it for this show, but be sure to tune in tomorrow at 9 for our next edition of FreightWaves Now.
We'll see you guys tomorrow.